Obviously, the women are screened into this program. It's part of the OPD, the Offending Personality Disorder Pathway. And for me, there are issues around that screening process in terms of ethnicity. I'm doing a little bit of work around that with a few colleagues from UCLan and around the country, just looking at why Black people aren't screened into this program when actually Black people are traumatized through racism, they're traumatized through all sorts of things in life and are overrepresented in the mental health service and prison. So why aren't they also being screened into these programs? It's worrying.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast. Today we're talking with Rachel Rose Burrell. Rachel Rose, you're currently the therapy manager and clinical lead for what must be one of the most important projects in the English prison system. And this is the Women's Therapeutic Community at HMP Send. And we will come on to that later on. But before we do so, could you tell us about yourself and how you came to be a psychotherapist?
Yes. Thank you for having me. I was born and raised in Wiltshire in a small town near Bath. My parents emigrated from Jamaica in the 60s, and from the age of 3, told my parents I wanted to be a nurse, and so that was my course of action and my focus from that very young age. I think for my 4th Christmas, for my Christmas present when I was 4, I got the full kind of nurse outfit with along with stethoscope and bag and cape. So, you know, I was already feeling very, very much a qualified nurse from that age. So that was kind of my direction of travel. And then I eventually did qualify as a nurse, but as I was nursing, one day there was a patient who was very, very anxious the day before her operation. She was, and I promised her I would come back and just sort of have a word with her and just be supportive and encouraging. And we were so busy that I didn't have time to do that. And I left work feeling really bad and thinking, oh my gosh, what I really want to do is spend more time talking to people and supporting them when they do feel anxious and distressed. I had taken psychology as A-level and was really interested in the field of psychology and the mind anyway, but felt that was the turning point. So then I started my training whilst I was nursing, and then eventually transitioned over to being a therapist.
Thank you. So from what you're saying, obviously your family were very supportive and helpful to you in this. Was there anything else about your family background that took you in that direction, do you think?
Well, I came from a Christian home. My father was a pastor for a while. Both my parents had prominent positions within the church, and one of their positions, actually, they were both on the choir, and so there was a lot of singing at home and a lot of music. And my family really are a singing family, and particularly different stages we all sang together, but particularly my sisters, and we wrote songs with a small church choir and won competitions and would go out and sing, and still do today, actually. But so we grew up in a Christian home, and the church was actually central to our lives. And so it was the kind of place for belonging and friendship and family and fun. I'm going to put in there sometimes a little bit boring. Was, you know, I'd prefer to be out with friends sometimes, but you know, it was sort of central to our existence. There was, as I said, a lot of singing, and the church that we were part of was called Bethel Apostolic, and so they had at least 40 churches around the country. So, and they would have lots of sort of regional events. So we were known as the Bristol district. So, you know, we had friends from Wales and Bristol and Reading, and then there were lots of national events. And as a result, we just developed hundreds and hundreds of friendships and traveled around the country to these different locations. Yeah, all based around church, but also based around, I suppose, in a sense, the therapeutic, but it was a faith community, and it was a wonderful experience. And a lot of it was around having, you know, there was always hope, and there was always some sort of meaning that was applied to life, because life was hard. It was hard being Black in this country. It was hard just getting ahead, and yeah, finding who you were. And so church sort of provided that space where you can just be, and that you were around people who understood and were kind of very similar to yourself, similar backgrounds. So church played a huge part in my life, but also it created this whole new world of, you know, friendships and you know, extended family almost.
It does sound very social, very sociable. As well. So you mentioned that you're a woman of colour. Did you find that had any effect on the trainings that you went on to take?
I think being a Black woman didn't necessarily impact the choice of course that I undertook. I was very clear about what I wanted to do. I was very focused and determined. I think being a Black woman affected how I was treated on these courses. And generally speaking, the training courses were not, I didn't have a good experience. It was very hard, very painful at times, very, very difficult. The racism was overt, and yes, also anti sort of religion, anti-faith was very overt. And yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to protect myself, and actually the courses that I wanted to do, the knowledge was great, but yeah, it didn't always meet my learning style. Often I was the only Black person on the courses, and sometimes just the presentation of issues around race and diversity. I mean, it was minuscule anyway, but what was presented, some of it wasn't too bad, but 2 hours on a master's course talking about race and culture and diversity, I was just shocked at that. I just couldn't believe that was it. And then people were sent out to work with people from all sorts of backgrounds. I just didn't think that was enough, but didn't really have the confidence and the voice to say that at the time. But yeah, so the training for me, the whole nursing right through to the therapy, there was always some racial dimension and some form of attack, and some sort of, even from tutors, things that I had to overcome. And yeah, it's been a hard, long road, but worthwhile, of course.
It was quite sad to hear that, Rachel Rose, because I think, when we think about therapy, we think about that enabling people to belong and feel included. So the fact that wasn't your experience during training, I'm sure that's not unique to you either. I'm sure, I know it's been an issue within the training courses for clinical psychology, for instance, where people of colour have felt that they haven't been included. It seems to have taken a very long time to get round to thinking more about how people are included and feel valued within training courses.
Very, very true. I know it's not an isolated case. I talk to many of my, particularly my Black colleagues who have a very similar experience. And I'll share one experience with you. I was doing something around group work. I went to some training, and the facilitator, I think she was trying to be helpful. So there was myself and two other Black women present. And she asked us to sit in the center of the circle with all the white members sitting around us. And then she sort of threw out these questions around race and how would we deal with, black people. And it was very, very bizarre. I was furious. And the one black woman left and never returned. And then when the third black woman she just sat really quietly. She didn't say very much. And I was furious at her too. I said, well, why aren't you saying anything? And she said, look, you've got to pick your battles. This happens all the time. And what's the point in getting angry about it? I'll just take the knowledge that I want and I'll go. But I think that was a turning point for me to sort of think about, well, what battles do I fight? What battles do I win? Do I just fight for the sake of fighting? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like a fight to get, what felt like a fight at the time to get through these training courses. But I needed that certificate. So I put myself through a lot for the sake of, getting those qualifications.
When we've spoken to other people of colour on this podcast, they've often mentioned that it's like having to do an extra load of emotional work, just keeping your guard up and dealing with all kinds of levels of slight and attack. Does that resonate with you at all?
It does. Also, one has to prove, I've had to be proving myself, proving my worth, proving I'm just as good, proving, and sometimes you can't actually be your authentic self. You've got to be almost this walking academic, studious, articulate person who I think it's about being listened to, respected, and being taken seriously. And yeah, it does add an extra layer, because sometimes you find, well, I've had to work twice as hard, but it's not just me. I mean, this is commonly said amongst black people, that you have to work twice as hard, twice as long. Even in my nursing, I was on a degree course, and it was very unusual. It was to have a degree course in nursing at the time, and being the only black person was horrendous. People just felt they were very clear. I just had no right to be on this course, and tutors, you could see the different treatment. I was treated differently, and that was, right through my sort of training, psychotherapy included. So yeah, I think, but this is no different to the journey of black people generally, isn't it? As if we talk about slavery, people had to overcome and endure and conquer and press through. And even whilst people were enslaved, they also were great when I say entrepreneurs, but they were great pioneers in sort of inventions, because they were doing such hard labor. They came up with all these different ways of making the workload easier. So lots of things that we use now in gardening, many black people came up with those inventions that never got credit for, even the watering can, things like that. So I think this is what happens, even though yes, it's difficult and painful, but out of it, some good things can happen too.
Just beg the question, though, how well can we be serving the needs of clients that come from black and Asian backgrounds, doesn't it? If we can't even treat colleagues with the same value and respect, how do we then manage it when there's a power dynamic created by us representing an authority? Yeah,
and I think this is part of the debate and discussion that's going on in sort of cross-cultural therapy, and those who are interested in having these discussions around culture and race in therapy, because the world of therapy is about respect. It's about empathy. The BACP has these qualities that, people have to adhere to, that, they're going to be integral and congruent, and, the client comes first. I mean, the framework is built around the client, so when we are sitting with individuals who are coming from different backgrounds or just different ways of life, I don't think it's acceptable for us not to, talk about them in a holistic way. That includes faith, that includes difference, and that actually it helps us to navigate through the life of the client, but also helps us to grow as professionally and personally, I feel, if we allow ourselves to go there. But, our training doesn't necessarily doesn't equip us to do that. And lots of therapists are not willing to talk about those issues unless the client brings it up. And so I think there are wider issues about why do people become therapists, because power, we can't deny the power dynamic in that. What is it we're trying to achieve? And if people are having sort of attitudes, sort of racist attitudes, but you find that in everywhere. So I think, but particularly in caring professions, I mean, there is an expectation that people are just a little bit more understanding and wanting to embrace all. But I think in reality, it's very different, and it's just a work in progress, isn't it? I think we've just got to keep having the conversations and keep trying to embed these things in our practice.
So you've hinted at this already, I think, but it sounds as if even your psychotherapy training was dogged by some of these issues. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Which was a shock to me, I'm here, I joined this course to understand people and and also to understand myself. And obviously people join these courses for different reasons. But I think even in these negative experiences, there's learning, and I've had to sort of build a resilience. I've had to think about the battles I fight or not fight. I've got to keep focused on my goal. I've had to think about not allowing things to deter me, or when I do fall, I get back up. I mean, I've been on I did a doctorate, but that wasn't my first attempt at a doctorate. My first attempt, I wanted to do a course or do some study and research around, just Black people in therapy and their experience of therapy. And I was told I couldn't do it, that I had to do some sort of comparative study, and it had to include white people. And I said, well, I didn't really want to do that. And my supervisors vilified me, actually, attacked me, told me I wasn't good enough, and first of all said they would progress me onto the next stage, and then they said they wouldn't. And then, eventually I left the course, just feeling absolutely dreadful and just thinking I was nothing and nobody, and that I couldn't study, and I would never be good enough at this sort of level. And it took me a few years to sort of even get the confidence to do a short course. I was so damaged as a result. But actually what it did was help me to reset my focus, and my faith helped me to do that, actually, that nobody has the right to tell me I can't. I can tell myself I can't, that's my limitation and that's my stuff, but no one else has the right to tell me I can't do what I want to do. And I sort of took that stance, and the second attempt was absolutely brilliant and ended up in me winning an award for my thesis. So the message is don't give up, just keep going and aim for your goals and your dreams.
I'm really shocked to hear that that was your experience, actually, but there's also this lovely sense of inspirational triumph at the end outcome, but I'm appalled that that was your experience, and that you've had to fight so hard.
I think it's common, and I was helping my niece write her thesis, and she was sort of looking at education, and it's just dire in the institutions, the experience of Black people. I'm only speaking about Black because I know about some Black experiences, but yeah, I think the whole death of George Floyd and the sort of wave of Black Lives Matter during the pandemic, and the discourse and the narratives and the discussions that we were able to have quite openly and freely, and the fact that internationally people came together to say this isn't okay, I think was a turning point. The issue, I think, is how do we maintain that momentum? How do we continue to work together to not just talk about these issues, but to actively address them? And I think that takes a collective. That's not just Black people doing that. That's white people. That's joint, and from all areas. All the major institutions. Health, education, mental health, faith. That everybody needs to come together to ensure that we continue with this message that we have to improve things for everybody, but including Black people who seem to have a difficult time, generally speaking.
Thank you. So you completed your psychotherapy training, came through it with your whole kind of, I imagine you must have been forged during that experience. What did you do when you finished your training?
My psychotherapy
Yes.
training. So I started working in community organizations. Some exciting work, actually. I got a job to develop a service in Southwark. And it was working with the largest estate in Europe, where they spoke 40 odd languages, and we were there to build a therapeutic service for this community. And my goodness, we pulled out all the stops. I mean, we had interpreting services, we had swimming classes for Muslim women, we had massage classes for babies. I mean, it was incredible, and we won an award for it. And soon after winning that award, they shut the service down. I mean, that blew my mind, actually. If something is going so well, why would you stop it? So yeah, I think, and that still happens today. I learned that funding is withdrawn from things that are successful. So I think that was a sort of starting point for me, and I sort of built from there. And I found myself in various jobs in terms of working in schools and other services where I went in to develop and build services. And then I went into education and became the head of a therapy service within a university setting, and did that for several years. And eventually ended up in the NHS again, working as a psychotherapist to support staff. And that was my job before I ended up here at HMP Send. So yeah, it's been I've loved the jobs that I've done, and sort of put my heart and soul into it. And just met some amazing people along the way as well, and the work has been really, really rewarding.
Thank you, Rachel Rose. In your doctoral thesis, you referred to racism quite a few times in terms of the thinking about therapeutic work. Can you say something about how racism's cropped up in terms of the therapy that you've delivered?
Yeah, so I was quite newly qualified, and was working with young people, and then got a second job, moved on to something else. And I was working in a residential unit for young people, and it also served the community. And a young woman was referred to me, and she must have had a conversation with the managers, I believe, and she asked, is this therapist white or black? And they said, the therapist is black. And she said, well, I don't want to see her, and this is a black woman. And they told me, so I was there ready, waiting for this client, and I was told that she's not coming. And I later found out it was because I was black, and I was absolutely blown away by that. In my thinking, it was great to see black people aspiring. There wasn't that many of us at the time in these positions. And so I celebrated it. So I couldn't quite understand why somebody wouldn't want to see me who'd never met me, not sat with me, and because I was black. And then one of the managers, or one of my colleagues, wrote for and was writing articles at the time, and said, "No, have you heard of internalized depression?" And so we got talking about this, and essentially what that means is this is a black person accepting and absorbing the same sort of negative attitudes and behaviors as those as the oppressors, if you like. So so those people who are racist, we absorb that way of thinking, and we attack ourselves, and we attack our racial group. And we are suspicious of our group. We have negative feelings towards our racial group. And my goodness, I can see that being played out, particularly when I was growing up, between the Caribbean and the African countries, and also within Caribbean countries, or between the Caribbean countries, where there was suspicion and dislike and derogatory thinking, and that all came from media and the way our history had been told, and the inaccurate and false stories that were told about our nation to us that we believed and accepted. And so what that led me to do was I went off and did a diploma in African and Caribbean studies. I thought, I've got to know my history. What I was taught in school was just about slavery and, that we're disempowered and, we originate from apes and, we don't really have much to give to society. But that course I did blew my mind. We were pioneers and originators of so much that no one ever talked about. And, that sort of helped me to have a pride in myself, my heritage, but also helped me then to teach other people, white and black, about the true history of black people in this world and our contribution to nations. But in terms of racism, I think that just permeates through everything, doesn't it? It's that fear of the other, and when we fear the other, we attack the other. And so, that's what that's about. We have to try and understand that. That's pathological. If you don't know somebody, you don't understand somebody, so you attack. That needs some unpacking and some work. And I think if we come from it from that angle, I think so we can have some really helpful and enriching conversations. And I do think with training and understanding, you can build that allyship, can't you? And I think throughout the pandemic and sort of moving forward, that we saw a lot of that people aligned themselves together from all different backgrounds and races and cultures to say, actually, treating people equally and with respect is the way forward.
As you were talking there, Rachel Rose, it does make me think about the power of the educational system to change things. I was listening to a podcast with Anthony Horowitz, who was talking, who's quite a bit older than I am, and he was talking about having enjoyed reading Lord of the Flies and The Go-Between at school. Well, that they were the texts I also studied at least a decade later, and how much of our curriculum and our style reflects very old ways of thinking about things, and how much different would the curriculum be if it did include a more diverse range of contributors when we were thinking about achievements, rather than just white people, predominantly white men.
Yes, indeed. I think, I mean, the purpose of institutions is to maintain the status quo, and that is for a reason, isn't it? And, British culture is very much white male dominated, isn't it? It permeates through everything. But if we were to be more open to the fact that actually women have played a huge role in the development of this country, Black people have played a massive role in the development of this country. I mean, there were Black people in this country in Rome, in Roman times, there were tens of thousands of people here in Victorian times, doing well, and before slavery. And so, if we gave a more accurate picture of history, I think it would enrich our culture. And maybe, I don't really like this word. I don't really like the word tolerance, but I do like the word acceptance. Maybe it would help people to be more accepting that actually, all these different, this interwoven kind of cultural mesh of the British culture is actually quite interesting and fantastic. And yeah, it would be wonderful to add that to the educational curriculum, but I understand there are lots of debates and resistance to that. And we have to ask why. We celebrate Black History Month every year now, and we see the amazing contribution Black people have made to the development of this country, to science, to innovation, technology, and we only want to do that once a month, but that's something that is actually really significant to the development of this country. So yeah, I'm very much for that, and I hope eventually that will become the case, that there is a more accurate picture of Black history that permeates throughout the curriculum, that people learn about, and yeah, I think it would be fantastic.
Thank you. David, do you want to ask the questions 7 and 8, because they probably have more?
Yes, okay. I did read through your dissertation, which I thought was great, and it certainly took me to places that I was very unfamiliar with, and I learnt a lot from it. And some of it was quite shocking, I think. But one of the things that you mentioned, which was new to me actually, I was very interested to see this, was a quotation from Neelam Zahid. She'd written that the experience of Jewish psychoanalysts having to move from Germany and Austria to the west, so to England and America primarily, became a kind of ethnic cleansing where they inversely repeated their past experiences. So what she was suggesting was they created this racially blind therapy. Can you tell us a bit about your understanding of that?
Yeah, when I read that statement, I was quite taken aback as well. But it's something that I'd heard about through my sort of discussions with fellow Black professionals, and just the journey of the development of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, which when I started training was considered racist and sexist. And so when I read this statement, it sort of resonated and made sense to me, in that we have what is called the father of psychoanalysis, and who this group became an oppressed group when they were fleeing Nazi power and oppression. They were the oppressed, but as so often is the case, in some senses became the oppressor, because we were told, when I was studying psychoanalysis, black people can't handle psychoanalysis because they're not insightful enough, and Freud has made it clear that this is really not for your kind, and then this whole language around psychoanalysis as well that was very separatist and very superior, and only certain people could get it. And then there was the infighting with psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and and we had even the governing bodies, the UKCP and the BACP, at one stage were at odds with each other. So this is something I think that sort of permeates right through the history of psychoanalysis. That, I think sometimes the way I look at it when I look at the statement is I have to think about the sort of drama triangle, that the victim can become the perpetrator and then becomes the rescuer. And, therapy is there to help and support. But if it's only for a certain number of people or certain kinds of people, then actually it then becomes aggressive. It becomes something that's separating people. And how can that be healthy and helpful? So that's my kind of the way I sort of unpack that statement, which is, something that could potentially have been good, became something that became harmful at the same time, because people had these very, very difficult experiences. And when I think about it, the history of Jews and Africans goes back to biblical times, when it was actually the Africans that enslaved the Jews. And I think we can't underestimate that history also. I think that's tied up in there somewhere. And I can't unpack it all, but our lives, all our lives are intertwined the further we go back, and it's all complex. And has a bearing on how we develop these theories today.
I think that puts it very clearly. And what that passage, I think, was saying to me is that we are all and always constrained by prejudice, and we mostly can't see it until some later stage. So, for example, what it reminded me of was when I was beginning my training, I knew of friends who couldn't get on training to be a psychotherapist because they were gay. And I think that has gradually changed over the years, but that was the prevailing layer of prejudice that existed at that particular time. And it's always a struggle, it seems to me, to develop our capacity to see what's there and what's blindingly obvious to many people, even though the rest of us can't see it. Anyway, you went on to mention a quotation from Darwin, which was also shocking to me, because I haven't read all of Darwin, so I was shocked when I saw this particular passage, which of course was a horrifying one about the place of black people in relation to the evolutionary cycle, which we know to be nonsense now. But that also reminded me of when I was doing my thesis years ago on the place of homosexuality in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, because Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, had written in very similar terms to Darwin about gay people as Darwin did about black people. So that was all pretty shocking. You must have found it shocking too.
Well, no, it's something that I'd heard about, and it was sort of projected onto me from a very early age, actually. That we were akin. It's strange, isn't it? We're all human, but somehow black people come from apes, and I don't know where white people are supposed to have come from. And I mean, it's a very strange sort of theory to me. But yes, I mean, derogatory comments about being an ape, looking like an ape, black people are apes. It's and therefore not human, subhuman. Not to be treated like humans, less than, all of that was just sort of permeated through life. What was interesting to me was how Freud really embraced some of Darwin's thinking, and so that was the thing that made me even more uncomfortable about our theories and what influences and what is incorporated in the development of these therapies and theories, and it's worrying, isn't it? And understandable why black people would reject the therapies and not want to engage with what is called talking therapies and helping therapies, because often there is a fear that their race and culture and religion are going to be dismissed, overlooked. Somehow they're going to be pathologized. I mean, Freud spoke about religion as some sort of collective anxiety and other derogatory comments around religion. So along with other therapists of the time. So we have to, I guess, those of us in the field have to understand that the history of the therapies and theories have spoken negatively about certain groups of our population, and therefore makes it hard for them to engage. And often they are the ones who really need the support, and therefore we have to be really mindful and competent and equipped to manage these dynamics in the therapeutic and mental health consulting spaces. We need to be skillful in how we engage people so that we are not reenacting those power imbalances, and we're not reenacting the prejudices and the stigmas. And if we are really serious about our craft and our profession, then I think this is a must, that we have to be constantly training and reading and working to be better at what we do.
And listening to your experiences of psychotherapy training, it sounds like most therapists would benefit from doing the course that you chose to do afterwards, in terms of benefit,
Wow.
Increasing their understanding of a wider cross-section of society.
Yeah, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? My gosh.
Isn't it?
But to be fair, I do believe that there are white colleagues who have done that. They have said, look, I need to educate myself. I want to be equipped. I want to be inclusive. I want to learn and understand. I want to be more effective. And they have done. And some of my black friends have said, actually, the person who taught me the most about my heritage and my culture was a white person. I did on that particular course, the most outspoken person and the most knowledgeable person, actually, among the students was a white woman who knew lots and lots. I don't even know why she was there, because, I mean, it sounds like she knew everything already. It slightly irritated me that a white woman had come to hijack a black course. But I had a word with the tutor, and he said, no, Rachel Rose, this course is for everybody, and it is good. It's good that we're all coming together. And so, it's also good that I challenge my feelings and my thoughts about, who does knowledge belong to? It's not black knowledge, it's everybody's knowledge. And that actually, if we hold it together and we are sharing it together, that's the best way, actually.
Thank you. And your thesis focuses on Black Christian churches in relation to mental health. Can you tell us a bit about what you found?
Yeah, I mean, I loved doing my project, and that course actually, in terms of psychotherapy, was one of the best courses I've ever done. It was just a wonderful experience. The study involved focus groups and interviews with people who identified as Black Christians, and they were coming from a whole range of denominations, including Catholic and New Testament and Methodist and Anglican. So a whole, traditional Black Pentecostal, as well as, the sort of modern day sort of Christian churches. And really fascinating what they had to say. They had a lot to say. And those who were interviewed were people who had mental illness, those who were currently recovering from mental illness, and some who had not experienced mental illness but had family members. So it was a real sort of, and some were therapists as well. So it was a really lovely combination of individuals. And what came out of that, the learning from that, was that within the churches, historically, churches have tried to support individuals. That's compassion and, food, shelter, all of that. But when it comes to mental health, particularly within the Black churches, there is a lot of misunderstanding, and I'm going to say ignorance around what mental illness is. And for some people, it's something that is spiritualized. It has a sort of some people view it as a demonic possession, that's what brings on mental illness. Some people just don't know what it is and are doing their best to try and understand, but they're not equipped, they're not trained. And so some people reported that actually going to the leader made it worse. And some people said they were just treated appallingly. They were vilified and pathologized and ostracized. And then there were pockets of churches that actually had developed therapeutic interventions. They had qualified people coming in, or part of their churches, to support individuals. And what they said about external services were that, the practitioners were arrogant. Often when they went for help, they were pathologized. They were just given medication, especially if they mentioned that they were Christian, because many of our therapeutic colleagues or people in the therapy world are not religious, generally speaking, and see religion as something that's oppressive, outdated, controlling, and really not scientific. So it has no place in the therapeutic space. So people were afraid to bring it up in the therapeutic spaces, uncomfortable about talking about faith. Some of them didn't talk about their faith at all, or their culture. There was fear of racism, and also within mental health generally, there was a fear of being labeled and diagnosed with more severe mental illness diagnoses, such as schizophrenia, which we know happens, and then just being offered medication. What people were saying was, we always wanted to be treated with respect in the church and outside the church. We want to be listened to. We want help and support. We want information. We want networks. We want a package of care. And so it was really helpful to hear all of that. And there are pockets around where that is happening, but it's not joined up. And and sometimes it wasn't happening at all. So really, really great piece of work, I felt, and just sort of inspired me to take it one step further. And so after that, I developed a wellbeing service within my own church, which served the community as well as the congregation, where we pulled all our professionals within the church and made links outside the church to help people with their mental health and well-being, as well as doing lots and lots of training as well.
That sounds a fantastic initiative. I was really struck as you were talking by, I can recognise what you're saying about mental health professionals often not valuing people's religious or spiritual beliefs and what that might contribute. And indeed, one of our previous guests, Nicoletta Porojanu, spoke about psychotherapy actually meaning healing of the soul, which ought to speak directly to faith and spirituality. And yet I think there's a tendency for psychotherapists, psychologists not to value that at all, barely to even ask about that, or if it does crop up, often evoking prejudice of its own sort from the practitioner, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard people say to me they've gone to therapy and they've been talking about their faith and religion, and the therapist has said, you don't believe in that nonsense, do you? And you're absolutely right that, what I found in my thesis was that faith is good for your health, actually, if you engage with it in the right way. It increases, it lowers the blood pressure. It increases the sort of relaxation response, because all the things that are around faith and church, we encourage, and we certainly encouraged it throughout the pandemic. So things like connection and a sense of belonging and singing and dancing and volunteering. I mean, the church community promotes all of these things. Praying is another form of meditation. Mindfulness is the kind of buzzword, but meditation, the church has been doing that for years. And compassion focused therapy, that's central to sort of Christian thinking and a Christian lifestyle. But now we've got compassion focused therapy. I mean, these are all sorts of biblical faith-based principles. And so absolutely, faith has its place. It helps people to have a purpose and meaning in life. And we know also that is important for human beings generally. So yes, I'm very much, a believer that faith has its place, and that if we can get training developers and supervisors to build their confidence in talking about these areas, I think, as I said at the beginning, I think it will enrich the encounter that you have with your client, but also help us to grow as a profession and on a personal level as well.
So, Rachel Rose, I've got half an eye on the clock, thinking what's the most important things we can talk about in the final minutes of this conversation. You can choose, but I will suggest for a beginning that your work at Send, the women's TC in prisons, is something that's pretty important to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first sort of read about the role, I was looking for a new job, and I read about this role, and I thought, this is really exciting and really interesting. And I was fortunate to get the role as head of psychotherapy and the therapeutic community manager at HMP Send. It's the only one of its kind in Europe, but we've been doing research and we can't find another like it. So we believe it's the only one of its kind in the world at the moment. And the focus is to reduce reoffending, obviously, but to work with the women to bring about meaningful change to their well-being and their mental health. And how it does that is the community becomes a mirror. It helps the woman to kind of take a look at herself, what she's doing, her decision making, why she does what she does, and everything has a sort of therapeutic element. Everything is discussed in these smaller and larger therapeutic spaces. Obviously, the women are screened into this program. It's part of the OPD, the Offending Personality Disorder Pathway. And for me, there are issues around that screening process in terms of ethnicity. I'm doing a little bit of work around that with a few colleagues from UCLan and around the country, just looking at why Black people aren't screened into this program when actually Black people are traumatized through racism, they're traumatized through all sorts of things in life, and are overrepresented in the mental health service and prison. So why aren't they also being screened into these programs? It's worrying, and so we're looking into that, and hopefully we'll have some answers around that process. So yes, it's really hard work. Working within a prison adds an absolutely different dimension, because it's not really conducive for healing and calmness, and trying to create that environment for growth and change, because sometimes it's so chaotic and always changing, and there's always something going on. But great team at HMP Send. So it's a multidisciplinary team of psychologists, psychotherapists, art psychotherapists, officers. We're working together. We're working in collaboration with other groups within services within the prison, OMU, chaplaincy, etc. And yes, I think it is a really fascinating and amazing service to work for. And the women, when they change, and when they're changing, and when they're really embracing the work, and absolutely phenomenal what can happen. It can really change lives, and so we're great believers in what we're trying to achieve, even though it's within difficult circumstances and difficult environments.
Whenever I've visited, I've always been very impressed by the spirit and the culture of the place, but I have been struck by the lack of diversity, as you've just mentioned. So that's something you clearly want to raise your profile about. And it's always felt a bit as if it were an important part of the prison activity, but perhaps could be given an even more higher profile. What do you think about that?
I'm absolutely 100%. I think when we're in a prison setting, it is very easy to become inward looking and to protect your service, actually, from everything else that's going on in the wider prison. And it takes a lot of hard work. And so, you have to kind of really think about what you invest in. But I personally don't feel we can have such a service without building those bridges with everyone else in the prison. I think it's important for the whole prison to embrace the therapeutic community, not just the staff who work in the service, and to see it as something good and helpful. And so one of our approaches now at Send, as we're coming out of the pandemic, is to really engage with the wider prison, with officers, with certainly our governor is very much on board, and deputy governor, with what we're doing, and to get voices to sort of champion what we're doing. And we're doing that through open mornings and inductions with new staff, and inviting, we had a national event where senior probation officers from around the country came to visit us. So it's about outward looking and keeping abreast with the changes and the developments within the field, and how we can add our voice to that, but also, really raising our profile within the prison. And obviously, I think research is also important. So the staff at Send within the community are about to embark on a piece of research, and also we're starting to think about writing articles as well, in hopes to get something out by the end of the year.
Great. Naomi?
Thank you, Rachel Rose. I'm just conscious of the time, and we always like to finish by asking people about how they protected their own well-being when facing hardship. Clearly faith's important to you, but I wonder if there's anything else you would add in terms of how you've managed to stay strong, even though it sounds like you've had some pretty aversive experiences on the way.
Yeah, so my church community, friends, family that love me, that are good for me, keep me grounded and focused, and cheerleaders. But singing is a really integral part of my life. So I was singing with the well-known London Community Gospel Choir for several years, and then did backing vocals for various artists, and sing with a powerhouse gospel choir now, and various different singing projects. So that and the gym, obviously, to keeping myself physically fit. During the pandemic, I became unwell, and to strengthen my lung capacity, I took up jogging for the first time. And so, yeah, just I'm really about just trying to learn. So I try new things. So at the weekend, I did a bit of crazy golf. So did that for the first time. So just really want to embrace life, really, and to live a life that's grateful from that position, and to really be looking for new ventures and new dreams to attain to a new goal. So always driving forward and always moving forward. That's kind of my mantra.
Yeah, that love of life, and also I think a determination not to get knocked down has really come across from your interview. Just thinking about the singing, not only is that something that people can find quite positive, we know now that that also helps the vagus nerve, doesn't it, in terms of protecting our well-being. So sounds like a great choice of activity.
I think that one final thing to say is I do find myself, as well as looking after myself, I do think it's important to give back. So I do lots of training, I suppose, around mental health and helping others to look after their mental health, particularly within the church, and just helping people to understand what that means. If we're going to be holistic, it's not just about being spiritual, it's about thinking about the whole of you, your whole well-being, which is your physical, social, spiritual, and mental and psychological health.
It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you, Rachel Rose.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Dave.
Brilliant. Really good to see you again, Rachel Rose.
Thank you. Thank you.